Well, I have something very different for you today, and that is a movie review. I want to share my thoughts on the movie Rust. I'm Dustin, and you're watching Guns of the West. I'm not really known for movie reviews. This has always been a shooting channel, but if you like the idea of a movie review, leave a comment below and let me know, and maybe we can talk about other westerns that you might want to hear about that I like, or that at least I've seen. Now, with this one, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. This is the one I'm sure everybody knows that back in 2021 had a horrible tragedy where the cinematographer Helena Hutchins was killed and the director, I forget his first name, apologize, but Souza was his last name, it was wounded. And that was when Alec Baldwin was holding the gun, fired it by mistake, and killed her, and unfortunately, and wounded him. Now, in this video, what I'm not going to do is talk about my thoughts on Alec Baldwin and did he pull the trigger and all that. I did that long ago. Back when it happened, I released a video about that. In fact, I'll put a link in the description down below on this video. I do just want to echo before I start my review, though, that my heart goes out so much to Helena Hutchins and her family and everyone else who was affected by that. It was just a horrible, horrible thing. But with that said, I do want to share some thoughts about the movie. Unfortunately, anytime we think about this movie, we're going to think about that tragedy. And it's really too bad because the thing is, Rust was good. And I want to share my thoughts. I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed it. Now, if you want to see the movie and you don't want to have any of it spoiled for you, I'm going to protect you from that. I am going to have some spoilers in this video, but I will save them for the end, and I will warn you before I start that. And so you are safe for now until I say otherwise, and then if you'd like to turn the video off, I'll understand. But first, just my thoughts on it, spoiler free. I will share just the basic premise of the movie. The basic premise of the movie is you have a 13-year-old boy in 1882 in Wyoming who is convicted of a crime that was accidental. Very ironic, considering the real life tragedy that happened on the movie. Similar situation within the plot from this boy. And he's sentenced to death, and I'm not spoiling really anything at this point. This is how the movie begins. But the premise of the movie is he's broken out before he can be executed by his grandfather. And then the movie is basically the two of them together on the run, making their way out of Wyoming, down through Colorado, New Mexico. The goal being to get the boy, Lucas, to Mexico. His grandfather is Harland Rust, who's played by Alec Baldwin. So that's where Alec Baldwin fits into the movie. And they get into their adventures and everything. And I have to say, it's not my favorite Western. I don't think I would probably even put it top 10, but I enjoyed it a lot. And to Helena Hutchins' credit, so much of the good that I could say about this movie, although the story is good too, is just the sheer beauty of it. Again, she was the cinematographer, and what an amazing job she did. Obviously, she's choosing the scenery shots, and there are so many shots in the movie of wide angles of the mountains and the skies and beautiful silhouettes against sunsets, even to the point I would almost say the movie was starting to feel a little heavy on that. There's a lot of it, and I think maybe the reason for that, I'm purely speculating here, but maybe the reason they kept so much of it in where normally it might be cut is because of what happened. And her family, they said, I watched a documentary about the tragedy, and her family is wanting people to see the movie. And so I think maybe they wanted to showcase her work as much as they possibly could where it was her last movie. And so I think maybe that's why they kept so much of that stuff in there. Another positive thing I would say about the cinematography itself is how it captures weather. There's scenes where, you know, the two are riding together through snow and things like that in the mountains, and it'll cut to a wide shot of the mountains with snow and dark, you know, heavy clouds rolling over the tops of the mountains, and that cinematography just pulled me in. It was great. There were times that I actually felt like I was starting to feel cold just from watching the atmosphere of the movie. It was just beautifully, beautifully shot and just captivating. It just keeps you engaged, if for no other reason, just for the look and the feel of the movie. A couple of nitpicks. One, I felt like the movie was a little bit long, not to the point that it was bothering me. I saw some negative reviews about the movie really complaining about that, and I do think it could have been trimmed up. There are some extra kind of side stories going on among the people who are searching for Harlan Russ and Lucas, and they get into some things. They're going off on getting into their own stories and stuff, and some of that stuff felt like the type of footage you would see on a DVD when you watch the deleted scene reels, and it was just kept in the movie, so it kind of drug out the runtime a bit. But again, in my opinion, it didn't hurt the movie. There was nothing that bothered me or I found overly boring or anything. In fact, a lot of it is pretty exciting stuff. It's just don't know that it was necessary. As far as historical accuracy, it was pretty good. I consulted a little bit with my friend Santee from the Arizona Ghost Riders, who saw it too, and we talked about the clothing. I'm not as much of an expert on the period clothing as he is, but it looked good to me. Everything looked good, right down to things like the beds and the houses, the towns, and everything. And Santee did confirm to me that the clothing was not perfect, but mostly great. And as for the guns, their historical accuracy, it was a little bit hit and miss. There were some that were and some that were not. Some of the, for example, single action army revolvers had the firing pins you could see, like they were the original versions and everything, but some of them did not, like Alec Baldwin's. Santee pointed this out to me. I missed it on my first watch, but as I went through and kind of watched parts of the movie again, I was able to spot it, and his did not. So it was a later reproduction that would have like a hammer bar, or excuse me, a transfer bar safety system in it. But the look of the guns was great. They even had the circular ejectors on them, showing that they would be early versions that would have existed in 1882. Before I move on from the guns, I have to mention one in particular that was just beautiful to look at, which was a Henry lever action, all engraved and inlaid. Just a beautiful rifle. You find out, Lucas has it at first, but you find out it was Harlan Rust, and before that it was his grandfather's, and it ends up getting into a little story about that. But just a beautiful gun, a treat to see. Most of the guns actually were. As for the cast, a lot of them were actors and actresses that I was not familiar with, but there were a few familiar faces. Obviously, Alec Baldwin is there. He plays Harlan Rust. Another one was Frances Fisher. She's in there too. She plays Harlan's sister. And for the most part, though, the rest of them I wasn't really familiar with. I looked them up and I was able to find some other movies they had done. One person I was excited to see was in it was Xander Berkeley. If you're not sure who that is, look him up. You'll recognize his face immediately. The guy's in so many movies. So I was excited to see he was in this, although it was very, very brief. More like just a cameo appearance. But the cast, they all, I thought, did a great job. Alec Baldwin, I thought, was great as Harlan Rust. Both when he's the rough, tough, mean old man and a killer, and also when there are some sort of tender moments between him and Lucas, and when they're in camps and things like that. But the whole cast, I really loved all the performances in this movie. Overall, I think it's a pretty good. I don't know if I dare say great, but it's a pretty good, entertaining Western. It's a gritty one, so if you're not comfortable with, a lot of violence and profanity, this movie is that, so you might not want to see it, but I would recommend it as long as you are okay with that. It was a really entertaining Western, and not only was it a good entertaining Western, but it had exceptionally good cinematography and what I thought to be a very clever ending, which I'll talk about in the spoilers. So how would I rate the movie? Usually I see movies rated with stars, 1 through 5. And I would probably say I would almost give this one a 4. And the only reason I would say not quite a 4 is because, again, it did drag a little bit because there were some extra things going on, which brought in extra people that maybe didn't need to be there. But I would probably say I would put this somewhere between like a 3.5 and 3.75 stars out of 5. Now, the rest, I'm going to have to give spoilers if I'm going to share my thoughts. So for those of you who don't want the movie to be spoiled, this is where you turn this video off. If you stick around, don't blame me when the movie gets ruined for you. Not that it would be ruined, but it will be spoiled, especially the ending. So if you're still here, I assume you want to hear the rest of what I had to say. First, at the beginning, the accident that happened was Lucas. There's a wolf on their ranch. Him and his little brother live there, and he tries to chase it off once. And After that, there's a moment where he and the other boy are in town. They get in an altercation with some other kids, and then their dad gets really upset, and he comes to the ranch the following day or maybe later that day, and he wants Lucas to come work for him because Lucas hurt his son, who can no longer work, at least for a while. And he says, "I'll be back tomorrow to get you." Well, tomorrow comes. Lucas sees the wolf again, runs out with that Henry Lever action, tries to shoot the wolf, and he makes a rushed shot, shoots just as that man is coming over, and he accidentally shoots and kills the man. So he's sentenced to be hanged. Now, I wasn't sure if they really did hang kids back then. And so I did some reading on that. I looked it up, and what I found was it was rare, very, very rare, but not unheard of for that to happen. So I won't say it was historically inaccurate that they sentenced a 13-year-old boy to be hanged. And because of the altercation that had happened the day before he accidentally shot this man, the judge decided that it was not an accident, it was a premeditated murder, hence the hanging sentence. And when I was reading on that, I found out something very interesting. There's a Supreme Court case that basically ended the death penalty for juveniles in the United States. The case is Roper versus Simmons, and that was in 2005. Much more recent than I thought. So yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility that that would have happened in 1882. Now, as for those extra stories and characters that I talked about, I have some notes here in front of me. If you see me looking down, I took some notes while I was watching the movie. One example I'll give you of extra stories is a character named Preacher. He's a bounty hunter, and there's a moment where he's in a saloon, and he meets a prostitute at the bar. So he spends the night with the prostitute, and in the next morning, they wake up, and she gets to talking to him, asking what he does for a living, says, "I'm a bounty hunter," and then he starts telling her how he specialized in rounding up runaway slaves, and then the movie sort of makes an implication she's a runaway slave, and that he's here to get her. Well, that ended up not going any farther than that scene, and so that was just kind of a branch that went nowhere, and that's the one example I'll give, but you have a few of these as the movie goes on that, again, I would expect normally to see in a deleted scenes type of a reel, but it's in the movie. It's brief enough that it doesn't, like I said before, it doesn't really hurt anything, but it was kind of a bridge to nowhere at the same time. Another thing, I think a reason they might have had extra characters in there is because, again, spoiler, but at the end of the movie, as Law is catching up with Harlan Rust and the boy, because so many people are looking for him from so many different angles, you get a lot more characters converging all at once for a much more violent, much more dramatic ending than it may have been if it was just maybe one lone marshal who had chased them down. So that might have been another reason for it, but again, it just felt a little bit drug out because they were doing all of that. Next, I want to talk about a few things that just didn't really seem to make sense to me in the story. Now, generally, I liked the story a lot. I really, really enjoyed the story. But one of the things was, again, spoiler, but as Harlan and Lucas are making their way, they run into two trappers who are staying in sort of a little makeshift cabin. And the trappers, they talk, they share coffee, they smoke together and everything. Well, long story short, eventually it turns out the trappers have a wanted poster of Harlan and Lucas, and so they decide they're going to try to collect the ward, and so they try to get the jump on them. Well, of course, Lucas and Harlan are the main characters. They get the better of these two trappers, and Harlan ends up killing both of them. Now, my problem is, it doesn't say how much time has passed, but it doesn't seem like it's been very long since these, Harlan and Lucas left town originally. And also these trappers, they're talking about how they're not really that successful, and so they're probably not going into town a lot, trading. So my question was, where did they get this wanted poster? If anything, it seemed like it was just a tool to move the plot and to give some excitement. It was a little weird to me that they had the wanted poster, but yeah, it is what it is. I will say, I won't spoil this part, but that scene did provide some dialogue that I really liked, including a clever line that I've never heard in a Western before, spoken by Alec Baldwin as Harlan Rust. The next part that didn't really make a lot of sense to me, I thought it could have been planned out and shot a little bit better, and met with one historical inaccuracy that I said I would get back to. they decide, or at least Harlan decides, the one horse that Lucas is riding is out of breath and it's going to die, and so they need to get rid of it. And so he'll use the opportunity to send it on its way by itself, make some false tracks that can be chased, and maybe give them a better chance of escaping. So he takes Lucas from the horse, he slaps the horse, and it takes off. And my thought was, yeah, I know you don't want to carry too much, but I probably would have taken some more stuff off the horse. It ran away with, maybe I'm remembering wrong, but it looked like it still had a bedroll or at least some other supplies and stuff. And he just sent it on its way, slapped it, and it took off. As far as the historical inaccuracy, I may even be wrong about it, but the trail they were on at that point in the movie had tracks on it, and it did not look like wagon tracks. It did not look like, at least to me, anything from the Old West. It looked like an ATV trail. It looked like it had seen heavy traffic from like modern four-wheelers and side-by-sides and stuff. And the last thing that didn't really make a lot of sense to me was at one point when Harlan and Lucas stop into a town, Lucas wanders off on his own. He tends to do that a lot in the movie, not a real bright kid. But he wanders off and there's a hanging that's about to happen. So he wants to see. And he goes up and he's waiting. And in the meantime, Harlan is in a store and there's a puppy for sale. And Harlan buys Lucas the puppy. And then later they're in camp and they're feeding the puppy, and Harlan's talking about how much the puppy eats. He said it has the appetite of a coyote, so it's kind of a burden. They end up getting rid of it anyway, and they give it to a mother and son that they meet, at a house. But anyway, I thought it was weird that Harlan would buy the puppy. Didn't really seem like his nature. He's a pretty rough, gritty guy. But I could also see, maybe he is trying to soften a little bit with Lucas because their relationship was very, very strained from the start of the journey. And after that, there is a moment when they're at a campfire. I mentioned before, kind of tender moment between the two. And the puppy maybe led to that. But it seemed to me, if I was on the run from the law and I'm trying to make it to my destination as quickly as possible, bringing a pet dog into the situation might not be the brightest thing to do, especially if it eats so much. As for the ending, and this will be the biggest spoiler, so if you're okay with the spoiler so far, but you don't want the ending spoiled, turn the video off. But I thought the ending was very clever. Now, we expect that the boy will make it to Mexico, and he does, but Harlan does not make it with him. They're in a ravine, and the characters all converge. You've got Preacher, the bounty hunter, you've got the marshal, and you've got Harlan and Lucas. And shootout happened, and kind of two that kind of mesh into one. Harlan gets wounded. He gets shot in the belly by Preacher. And then Preacher and the marshal kind of get into it. And then Harlan gets back up, shoots Preacher from behind. It's a big, violent scene. Well, he ends up making a deal with the marshal that he'll go in quietly if the marshal will let the boy go. And there's a kind of a talk about that. And eventually the marshal agrees. And they're on their way back. They meet up with some other law enforcement. And when they ask what happened to Lucas, the marshal tell them that Lucas had tried to run away. Him and his horse fell off a ravine, fell 100 feet and died, and that scavengers had picked up the body. They couldn't get the body. Well, the other law enforcement, they believe this, and so they decide they'll just take Harlan back. The marshal goes off on his own way. They take Harlan into town. They're going to hang him. And as they're getting him out of the jail cell, when they're ready to do that, Harlan at this point is very, very close to succumbing to his wound when he got shot in the ravine. And so he can't really walk. They're dragging him to the gallows. They get him up onto the gallows, and just before they're going to put the rope around his neck, he dies. And they tell that to the man in charge of the hanging, and he says, well, kill him twice then. So they go ahead and put the rope around his neck, and they hang the body. And then it cuts to, Lucas. He makes it to Mexico, meets up with his little brother because Harlan, come to find out he had arranged with his sister to get the brother to safety as well. Now, the reason I thought the ending was clever, Harlan dies, but not by hanging. The law enforcement, they didn't get the satisfaction of killing for his crimes. They got to bring him there, and they did hang him, but the cause of the death was actually the wound that he sustained while he was saving the boy. So he got to die saving Lucas, rather than giving satisfaction to law enforcement. Now, those are basically my thoughts on the movie. If you saw the movie, leave a comment down below. I'd love to know what you thought of it. And again, leave a comment letting me know if you'd like to see more talk about Westerns. And I apologize for the very amateur nature of this movie review. This was, kind of the first one. I've talked about mistakes about guns in movies before, but this is the first movie review. But again, I'd give this probably 3.5 to 3 3/4 stars out of 5. Not my favorite Western, but absolutely gorgeous to look at, and a good story, and again, kind of a unique, clever ending. And again, heart goes out to Helena Hutchins and her family. There is a nice little tribute at the end of the movie. Right before the credits plays, it says Helena, or for Helena, and then there's a little quote. I wrote it down here. The quote was, "What can we do to make this better?" So apparently that was something that she would say on the set a lot, and I have to say, whatever her method is, she did do a great job of making things better, because beautiful movie. There was also another cinematographer whose name was Bianca. I forget her last name. I apologize. But anyway, she took over the cinematography when the filming resumed like a year and a half later after the tragedy. And she did a great job too. There's no clear distinction as you're watching the movie, like, oh, that scene must have been shot by Helena and this one must have been shot by Bianca. She did a really good job of keeping Helena's style throughout the rest of the movie. So I was impressed. Like I said, it's a movie that's always going to be remembered for the tragedy that happened on set, and it's really a shame because, again, the movie is good. The proceeds, at least partially, go to Helena's family. So that's what ultimately made me decide I would go ahead and support this. A lot of people will never watch the movie because of what happened. They'll boycott it. And if you're in that camp, you are 100% justified. I would say that's not wrong at all. But if you are open-minded to it and you want to see it, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Please don't forget to click the like button down below and subscribe to the channel so you can see more videos, mostly back to the shooting content that you see on this channel. And if you look in the description, you'll see my other link to my other video about Rust. You'll see where to find me on social media and where to find all the great Guns of the West products. Thank you so much for watching.